So we are halfway through chapter 9. Again, going through First Maccabees, um, part of what's called the Septuagint, really part of the ancient scriptures. Um, again, not as familiar with for everybody, but certainly part of our experience. And as we've gone through the first 9 chapters, starting with Alexander the Great and going through the histories, this is a history book, talking about how Alexander's empire was divvied up, how it was initially Israel, the parts of Israel were under the Ptolemies that were Egyptian, and then about 150 years later, the Seleucids, which were basically the Persians, conquered that part of the area. And then there was just infighting and rebellion with the Maccabees leading them, the Maccabee family leading that rebellion. And so we're kind of in the midst of that rebellion and the midst of the turmoil. There's about a 30-year period there that the area of Israel is kind of volleyed back and forth between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and the Israelites, trying to regain the land that was theirs. And so that's kind of where we are. Judas Maccabeus is dead. He's been killed. But that's again why the name Judas was so prevalent in Christ's time. This is about 200 BC to 170 BC, so a couple of centuries before Jesus's time. Again, why Judas was so prevalent. Again, the Judas we're familiar with is Iscariot because of the betrayal, but the not even stepbrother, but essentially what we call a brother of the Lord. One of them was named Jude, and we like in English to say Jude because it differentiates from Judas, even though in the Greek it's the same name. Similar as Joshua in the Old Testament and Jesus is the same name, Jesus. But there's a lot of those kind of connections there. The issue is now, though, that the battle for the temple in Jerusalem, it's been desecrated, and the Israelites are trying to reclaim it and maintain it, and that's kind of where we are in chapter 9. So we're kind of like I said, sort of halfway through. If you go to verse 54, it's kind of where we left off. Then in the 153rd year, and I should note, I mentioned where the chronology in this is Jewish chronology. It's not associated with Christian chronology, BC, AD. So even though it's 153rd year, it has nothing to do with AD or BC. That's more of the chronology of Jewish time.
And that's based off of what, like 153rd year, what, when the temple was built again?
I think so, of the second building of the temple. Right after the deportation and the return, I think that's when they begin, or at least this chronicler is utilizing that as the timeline.
Okay.
Because remember, this is actually written about 100 BC by a Jewish writer. So. So then the 153rd year, in the second month, Alchemist issued the command to take down the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary. Then he took down the work of the prophets and started to destroy it. At that instant, Alchemist was stricken, his mischief was thwarted, his mouth was shut up, and he became paralyzed. He could not even speak a word so as to give orders concerning his property. So Alchemist died then and there in great pain. When Maccabees saw that Alchemist had died, he returned to King Demetrius. Thus the land of Judah was peaceful for 2 years. So, should be clear, the inner court, so the courtyard in Jerusalem, ancient temple, the outer court, which is called the court of the Gentiles, was the largest area. It corresponds to our narthex. Okay, so when you come into a church, you come into the narthex. That's sort of the outer court. Why the court of the Gentiles? Well, as the name implies, only Gentiles. That's as far as the Gentiles could go in. And then, of course, women, because Jewish women could not enter the temple either. That's as far as they would enter in. So only the inner court, what we would call the nave, was allowed, which is called the court of the faithful. That's where the Jewish men would enter into. What this is talking about, what Alchemist is trying to do, is to take down the wall that separated the outer court from the inner court, which would have, combined everybody. And if you've ever been to a Jewish synagogue, even today, or temple, and some of them, especially if they're Orthodox, to this day, the men and the women are separated. Different sides. There's a sheet at the very least separating the two. So it was a very strict thing, and this is why, trying to defile the temple again, he was stricken and died, the way he did.
If they, with the one came to the women, was it that they were women, they were separated, no matter how old or how young they were?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So even if they were young women, prepubescent, if you will, they would not go into there unless they were dedicated to the temple, like Mary was. In that situation, yes, she would enter into until her time of menstruation, but they would have to be actually dedicated to the temple and identified as being allowed to enter.
And then was it come out?
And then at the time of menstruation, they would be betrothed to a male, as Mary was, typically a widower who had money and resources that could provide for her.
And then wait till she gets old again, she gets back to the temple.
In some cases, yeah,
Yeah.
as a virgin, sort of a Jewish form of monasticism, if you will. So the prophetess Anna, who's there at the presentation of the Lord, it was a virgin, and this describes that she had lived with her husband, her betrothed, until the time of being widowed and menopause, and then she could return back into the temple.
So Artemis was punished from the Israelites
It's punished by God, yeah.
by God, by
Yeah.
God or the Israelites?
Yes, the God of Israel.
No, by God or the Israelites.
By God.
Okay.
Yeah. So for trying to desecrate the temple. So verse 58, soon all the lawless men deliberated among themselves, saying, behold, Jonathan and those with him are living in peace and certitude. Now therefore let us bring Bacchides back here, and he will seize them all in one night. Just pause there, a reminder that Jonathan is now the king of Israel, and the lawless are the Jews, Israelites, but that have a kind of apostatized. They've kind of gone to the Greeks and have forsought Israel and God. They went and conversed with him, and he departed to come with a large army, secretly sending letters to all his allies in Judea, telling them to capture Jonathan and those with him, but they could not do so because their plot had been discovered. So Jonathan and his men caught about 50 of their countrymen who were the leaders of the agitation and killed them. So again, even within Israel, so again, there's Greeks, descendants of Alexander, who are trying to get the area. But even within Israel, even amongst the Jews, there's factions that are kind of working against each other. So this is why you have all these Greek names in there as well. So then Jonathan, Simon, and those with them departed for Bethbasi in the desert and rebuilt the outposts that had been destroyed and strengthened it. When Bacchides heard of this, he gathered all his army and sent orders to the men of Judea. Then he arrived and camped at Bethbasi and attacked it for many days, making engines of war. But Jonathan left Simon, his brother, in the city and headed out into the country with a handful of men. He struck Odomera and his brothers and the sons of Phasiron inside their tents. Then he launched his attack and entered into battle with his armies. Meanwhile, Simon and those with him came out of the city and set on fire the engines of war. Once they took the offensive against Bacchides, he was crushed by them. They upset him greatly because his plan of attack was in vain. Also, he was filled with rage at his advisors, the lawless men who urged him to come into the country. So he killed many of them and then decided to return home. So this is a history book. There's going to be a lot of detail about battles and things like that. If you like history, you enjoy it. If not, sorry. But this is just the nature of this. So there's going to be some details on battles and things like that. But ultimately, Bacchides kind of gets convinced, yeah, come in here. It'll be an easy victory. He goes there and isn't an easy victory. And he's like, why am I here?
Easy, nor victory.
Yeah, so So then 70, when Jonathan learned these events, he sent envoys to make peace with Maccabees and to obtain freedom for the captives. Maccabees accepted the proposal and swore to Jonathan he would not harm him all the days of his life. He returned to him the hostages taken earlier from the land of Judah. Then he returned to his homeland and made no further attempt to come into their country. Thus the sword was laid down in Israel. Then Jonathan settled down in Michmash, where he began to judge the people and to destroy the ungodly men of Israel. So Maccabees makes peace. Why? War is costly, for one. You need soldiers, and if you get them killed, I mean, you have to replenish them. It's not always easy. And if you're fighting a battle in one area, you're leaving your backside exposed. And so, again, unless it's going to be a victory that is for certain, it's easier just to make peace. And of course, you make peace until when?
Until you can make war.
Until you can make war. Exactly. So, as long as you're at peace, you can gather your resources back again. Okay.
You can win.
Exactly. So, any other questions about chapter 9? Okay. Let me pause occasionally because I have notes on this as well. Somebody else want to read loudly chapter 10?
Sure. In the 160th year, Alexander Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus, Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus, landed and occupied Ptolemais. They welcomed him, and there he began to reign. When Demetrius the king heard of it, he assembled a very large army, and marched out to meet him in battle. And Demetrius sent Jonathan a letter in peaceable words to honor him. For he said, "Let us act first to make peace with him, before he makes peace with Alexander against us. For he will remember all the wrongs which we did to him, and to his brothers, and to his nation." So Demetrius gave him authority to recruit troops, to equip them with arms, and to become his ally. And he commanded that the hostages in the citadel should be released to him. When Jonathan came to Jerusalem and read the letter in the hearing of all the people and of the men in the citadel, they were greatly alarmed when they heard that the king had given him authority to recruit troops. But the men in the citadel released the hostages to Jonathan, and he returned them to their parents. And Jonathan dwelt in Jerusalem and began to rebuild and restore the city. He directed those who were doing the work to build the walls and encircle Mount Sion with square stones for better fortifications, and they did so. Then the foreigners who were in the strongholds that Maccabees had built fled. Each left his place and departed to his own land. Only in Bethzer did some remain who had forsaken the law and the commandment, for it served as a place of refuge.
Okay, pause there for a second. Just go through a little bit of that. So you have Alexander, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes. So again, Alexander being Greek, named after Alexander the Great. Conquered Ptolemais. And then Demetrius is coming from the other side as well. And so Jonathan's kind of being courted because those two armies have to battle, and they don't want to have to battle a third army with Jonathan as well. So, and so they are trying to make peace with him. And this is going to be kind of a theme now, which shows that Jonathan is gaining a stronghold within Israel.
For geographic clarification, is Alexander more like out in Syria and Turkey, and Demetrius is in Egypt, or is it flipped?
I'm really not sure exactly, but yes, those are sort of that's the idea. You got sort of the Greeks from the north and the Greeks from the south. So, but yes, that's kind of where it is. And as they're kind of negotiating, he's got time. Jonathan has time now to build up his fortifications and things like that.
And when he said that he gave him permission to recruit troops, why would Jonathan need Demetrius' permission?
Basically, what he's saying is, we're not going to prohibit you. We're not going to see it as an act of aggression. We're not going to see it as a buildup of, your buildup of troops. It's kind of like, Japan after World War II could not build up troops, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to see it as an act of aggression. Same thing Hitler in World War II, Germany was forbidden from building up troops. Of course, he ignored that, and so did the rest of the world. So we have history there. But that, yeah, that's what that's what that means.
Want me to continue?
Yeah, continue with verse 15.
Now Alexander the king heard all promises which Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, and the men told him of the battles that Jonathan and his brothers had fought, of the brave deeds they had done, and of the troubles they had endured. So he said, "Shall we find another such man? Come now, we will make him our friend and ally." And he wrote a letter and sent it to him in the following words: King Alexander, to his brother Jonathan, greeting. We have heard about you, and that you are a mighty warrior, and worthy to be our friend. And so we have appointed you today to be the high priest of your nation. You are to be called the king's friend. And he sent him a purple robe and golden crown. And you are to take our side and keep friendship with us. So Jonathan put on the holy garments in the 7th month of the 160th year, at the feast of the tabernacle. And he recruited troops and equipped them with arms in abundance.
Okay, so just again to follow up on that, Alexander's creating an ally in Jonathan again, with the hopes of defeating Demetrius. Two armies against one. Again, this is all posturing and nothing different than it happens in today's times. So, go ahead.
When Demetrius heard of these things, he was grieved and said, "What is this that we have done? Alexander had gotten ahead of us in forming a friendship with the Jews to strengthen himself. I also will write them words of encouragement and promise them honor and gifts, that I may have their help." So he sent a message to them in the following words: King Demetrius, to the nation of the Jews, greeting. Since you have kept your agreement with us and have continued your friendship with us, and have not sided with our enemies, we have heard it and rejoiced. And now continue still to keep faith with us, and we will repay you with good for what you do for us. We will grant you many immunities and give you gifts. And now I free you and exempt all the Jews from payment of tribute and salt tax and crown levies. And instead of collecting the third of the grain and the half of the fruit of the trees that I should receive, I'll release them from this day and henceforth. I will not collect them from the land of Judah, or from the 3 districts added to it from Samaria and Galilee, from this day and for all time. And let Jerusalem and her environs, her tithes and her revenues, be holy and free from tax. I release also my control of the citadel in Jerusalem, and give it to the high priest, that he may station in it men of his own choice to guard it. And every one of the Jews taken as a captive from the land of Judea into any part of my kingdom, I set free without payment. And let all officials cancel also the taxes on their cattle, and all the feasts and the Sabbath and the new moons and appointed days, and the 3 days before a feast and the 3 days after a feast. So let them all be days of immunity and release for all the Jews who are in my kingdom. No one shall have authority to accept anything from them or annoy any of them about any matter. Let Jews be enrolled in the king's forces to the number of 30,000 men, and let the maintenance to be given that is due to all the forces of the king. Let some of them be stationed in the great strongholds of the king, and let some of them be put in positions of trust in the kingdom. Let their officials and leaders be of their own number, and let them live by their own laws, just as the king has commanded in the lands of Judea. As for the 3 districts that have been added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them also be annexed to Judea, that they are considered to be under the one ruler and obey no other authority but the high priest. Ptolemais and the lands adjoining it I have given as a gift to the sanctuary in Jerusalem, to meet the necessary expenses of the sanctuary. I also grant 15,000 shekels of silver yearly out of the king's revenue for the appropriate places, and all the additional funds which the government official have not paid as they did in the first years, they shall give from now on for the service of the temple. Moreover, the 5,000 shekels of silver which my officials have received every year from the income of the services of the temple, this too is canceled, because it belongs to the priests who minister there. And whoever takes refuge at the temple in Jerusalem, or in any of its precincts, because he owes money to the king or has any debt, let him be released and receive back all his property in my kingdom. Let the cost of the rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary be paid from the revenue of the king, and let the cost of the rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and fortifying it round about, and the cost of rebuilding the walls of Judea also be paid from the revenue of the king. When Jonathan and his people heard these words, they did not believe.
Hold up there, Michael. Just want to
That's a big
touch on
price.
several things there.
That's a huge cost.
Yeah, so to answer your question previously, I can answer that. Demetrius is the Seleucid, so he's from Persia area, and Alexander's from the Ptolemies, from the Egyptian area. Yes, Demetrius is giving up a lot.
Oh, that's more than a lot.
He's given up a lot.
But he also has a lot of control of has a lot of control in the whole place. Right?
He had control over the place, but clearly he's recognizing that that's slipping through his fingers.
Mhm.
So it makes no difference.
So it makes it look like I'm giving it. So
Correct.
And it makes it and then if Jonathan gets it, now he's a bulwark
yeah.
against Alexander.
Correct. So he's trying to lure Jonathan into this, but basically what he's saying is all the decrees that really caused all the problems in the first place, all the restrictions that the Seleucids put on the Jews in the first place, the requirement to eat pork, the no more circumcision, the no more feast days, the no more temple. He's letting go of that, which is pretty significant. He's actually taking the role of a leader for the first time, in the sense that he's going to build up the governmental properties using his own funds, as opposed to taking the funds from the Jews, which he had previously, or not he had necessarily, but the Seleucids had previously done. So he's reversing that. But even more so, what he's giving up is the army within the king's palace. And to understand that armies in those days were made up of many, many different nations. You conquer a nation, you take some of the soldiers, and they become part of your army. But you put them on the front lines. So if they're going to get killed first, no big deal. They were conquered army already. It's no big deal, no loss.
A dead man can't rebel.
Correct. This is, we know this from, again, we go back to the 300 in Sparta. Darius's army is full of all these different people. However, none of them are really Persians until the very end, when the high-ranking and most trained ones. So he doesn't have a problem throwing all these soldiers at Leonidas and the Spartans to get killed, because it's no big deal. I still have to march all these people back.
If they're dead, I don't have to pay
If they're dead, I don't have to pay them. I don't have to provide food. I don't need resources. So this is how armies were done. You don't allow one of those guys next to the emperor or the king, because one of those guys can rebel. He can simply slit your throat, and you're no longer king anymore. So this is a kind of, when I say Demetrius is giving up, he's giving up everything. I mean, he's basically saying to the Israelites, you win, I'm putting you on equal par now. And so it's a very significant thing. We can also notice here, what are the two areas assigned to Jerusalem now?
Galilee and Samaria.
Two places that, again, are very important in Jesus's ministry, right? So this is where Galilee and Samaria have had that affinity to Jerusalem, and why Jesus can be born in Galilee and come from Galilee and preach in Galilee and go through Samaria, because this was part of the area for the last 200 years. Okay, so we can continue there with.
Father Simon, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So when we've been reading in the Old Testament, we're reading it through Christ. So I appreciate what you just said about Galilee and Samaria, because that makes sense. But and I was like, why do we need to know all of this stuff about these wars? But as they're giving away all of these requirements that are needed, Christ got rid of all of those. Is this like the foreshadowing of that? Or is that why this is important? This book is important to us?
There's an element of that. There's a lot of these things that foreshadow Jesus is coming. It's why this book was removed at the Council of Jamnia by the Jewish people, because there's so much of this that ties into Jesus, and that's another element of it. Um, again, previously not last week, 2 weeks ago, when we read through, Judas was described as the savior of Israel. Well, as I said at that time, if you juxtapose that 200 years later, Judas is not only not the savior of Israel, but Judas is the enemy of Israel. He's the one who is responsible for the death of the Messiah. And so, you can't have a book that describes Judas Maccabeus, but a Judas being the savior of Israel, and then 200 years later have that a man named Judas betrayed the Messiah. So there's a lot of these little things that are in this book, even though it's 16 chapters. Each one of these has these little ties that it is all foreshadowing that. I don't know if we want to say Jesus fulfills, or that is part of the history of the Jewish people, that when Jesus comes along, it's not lost on them. Much like I said with Isaiah, every time Jesus is saying something and quoting something from Isaiah, it's not lost on the Jewish people. And every time Jesus does something that corresponds to Maccabees, it's not lost on the Jewish people. It's why so many of the Jewish people joined him, and why probably again the Pharisees felt he was such a threat, because they recognized it too. But that meant that they were no longer in charge. So
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
yeah. So okay, so verse 46.
When Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs which Demetrius had done in Israel, and how he had greatly oppressed them. They favored Alexander, because he had been the first to speak peaceful words to them, and they remained his ally all his days. Now Alexander the king assembled large forces, and encamped them opposite Demetrius. The two kings met in battle, and the army of Demetrius fled, and Alexander pursued him and defeated them. He pressed the battle strongly until the sun set, and Demetrius fell on that day. Then Alexander sent ambassadors to Ptolemy, king of Egypt, with the following message: Since I have returned to my kingdom, and have taken my seat on the throne of my fathers and established my rule, I crushed Demetrius and gained control of our country. And I met him in the battle, and he and his army were crushed by us, and we have taken our seat on the throne of his kingdom. Now, therefore, let us establish friendship with one another. Give me now your daughters as my wife, and I will become your son-in-law, and I will make gifts to you and to her in keeping with your position. Ptolemy, the king, replied and said, Happy was the day on which you returned to the land of your fathers, and took your seat on the throne of their kingdom. And now I will do for you as you wrote. But meet me in Ptolemais, so that we may see one another, and I will become your father-in-law, as you have said. Ptolemy set out from Egypt, he and Cleopatra his daughter, and came to Ptolemais on the 162nd year. Alexander the king met him, and the Ptolemy gave him Cleopatra his daughter in marriage, and celebrated her wedding at Ptolemais with great pomp, as kings do.
Okay, pause there. So we're introduced to Cleopatra, who was Greek. And so, yes, this is the famous Cleopatra. So remember, the Seleucids had conquered the Ptolemies, and Egypt, and now Alexander has defeated Demetrius and restored Egypt back to the Ptolemaic dynasty. And in doing so, kind of is going to fuse and secure that lineage there in Egypt. And Demetrius has been defeated, and so now Persia is kind of reeling. And this again, there's a bit of a vacuum now. We've got north of Israel, you got Syria, modern day Syria, Turkey, Asia Minor, all that stuff. That's kind of there's kind of a vacuum now, and who's going to fill those vacuums is important.
Real quick for clarification, then who exactly is Alexander? This Alexander, because if I thought he went and took over Egypt, but apparently the king of Egypt is still in charge, and he's just is he just being supported by Egypt to go and attack?
No, he's a descendant of the Ptolemy lineage, but remember they lost, so that he was sort of
Exiled,
exiled.
and then he came back, took it back, then Who is it that who is it that Alexander is actually talking to?
But, well, Ptolemy is the placeholder, if you will. So
But is this Alexander the Great?
he's a descendant of Alexander the Great.
Descent.
Yes. So when Persia conquers another area, and Alexander had to do this as well, you got to leave somebody in charge, right? And so Demetrius isn't running Egypt from Egypt. He put Ptolemy in charge.
So he conquered him and then said, as long as you keep doing what the heck I tell you, you can stay in charge. You just answer to me now.
Yeah.
And then
He's-
Alexander
he's-
shows up.
He's still one of his kinsfolk,
Mhm.
but he's a conquered kinsfolk. So he's under occupation. So,
Then Alexander shows up. Basically, they go into rebellion.
and says, let's unify the empire.
Okay.
Okay. So it's it's confusing, certainly. But that's what happens. And something of a similar note happens when Constantine dies and separates his empire into 4 quadrants, and we have more stuff. So anyway. Yep.
Then Alexander the king wrote to Jonathan to come to meet him. So he went with pomp to Ptolemais and met the 2 kings, and he gave them and their friends silver and gold and many gifts, and found favor with them. A group of pestilent men from Israel, lawless men, gathered together against him to accuse him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king gave orders to take off Jonathan's garments and to clothe him in purple, and they did so. The king also seated him at his side, and he said to his officers, "Go forth with him into the middle of the city, and proclaim that no one is to bring charges against him about any matter, and let no one annoy him for any reason." And when his accusers saw the honor that was paid him, in accordance to the proclamation, and saw him clothed in purple, they all fled. Thus the king honored him and enrolled him among his chief friends, and made him general and governor of the province. And Jonathan returned to Jerusalem in peace and gladness.
Okay, pause there. And that's so Jonathan now is basically de facto king of Israel. And Alexander actually, surprise, surprise, honors his word that he gave earlier. A rarity that happens, but in this case, it happened that Alexander puts Jonathan in charge of Jerusalem. So, 67. Go continue.
In the 165th year, Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, came from Crete to the land of his fathers. When Alexander the king heard of it, he was greatly grieved and returned to Antioch. And Demetrius appointed Apollonius, the governor of Syria, and he assembled a large force and encamped against Gemnia. Then he sent the following message to Jonathan the high priest: "You are the only one to rise up against us, and I will become a laughingstock and reproach because of you. Why do you assume authority against us in the hill country? If you now have confidence in your forces, come down to the plain to meet us, and let us match strength with each other. For I have with me the power of cities. Ask and learn who I am and who the others are that are helping me. Men will tell you that you cannot stand before us, for our fathers were twice put to flight in their own lands, and now you will not be able to withstand my cavalry, and such an army in the plain, where there is no stone or pebble or place to flee." When Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, his spirit was aroused. He chose 10,000 men and set out from Jerusalem, and Simon, his brother, met him to help him. He encamped before Joppa, but the men of the city closed its gates, for Apollonius had a garrison in Joppa. So they fought against it, and the men of the city became afraid and opened the gates, and Jonathan gained possession of Joppa. When Apollonius heard of it, he mustered 3,000 cavalry and a large army, and went to Azotus as though he were going further. At the same time, he advanced into the plain, where he had a large troop of cavalry, and put confidence in it. Jonathan pursued him to Azotus, and the armies engaged in battle. Now Apollonius had secretly left 1,000 cavalry behind them. Jonathan learned that there was an ambush behind him, for they surrounded his army and shot arrows at his men from early morning till late afternoon. But his men stood fast as Jonathan commanded, and the enemy's horses grew tired. Then Simon brought forward his force and engaged the phalanx in the battle, but the cavalry was exhausted. They were overwhelmed by him and fled, and the cavalry was dispersed in the plain. They fled to Azotus, and entered Beth Dagon, the temple of their idol, for safety. But Jonathan burned Azotus and the surrounding towns and plundered them, and the temple of Dagon, and those who had taken refuge in it he burned with fire. The number of those who fell by the sword, with those burned alive, came to 8,000 men. Then Jonathan departed from there and encamped against Eklalon, and the men of the city came out to meet him with great pomp. And Jonathan and those with him returned to Jerusalem with much booty. When Alexander the king heard of these things, he honored Jonathan still more, and he sent to him a golden bucket, such as it is the custom to give to the kingsmen of kings. He also gave him Akron and all its environs as his possession.
Okay, so Demetrius dies in battle. His son Demetrius takes up the reins and has Apollonius continue the attack. Of course, Jonathan defeats him in battle, and of course, Alexander's gonna be happy about that because he did his dirty work for him. So that's kind of where that is. So yeah, so like I say, some of these things we're going to blow through a little bit because there's just it's a lot of history and things like that. So, any other questions on chapter 10? Okay, let's move on to chapter 11. Somebody else want to read that one?
Y'all get? Y'all want to do it? Chapter 11? Oh, yeah.
Then the king of Egypt gathered together a large army, like sand along the seashore, and many ships, and he sought to obtain possession of Alexander's kingdom by deceit, and to add it to his kingdom. So he set out for Syria with words of peace, and those from the cities were open to him and met with him, because King Alexander ordered them to meet him since he was his father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the cities, he set a band of soldiers in every city. But when they neared Azotus, they showed him the temple of Dagon, which had been burned, and Azotus and the surrounding fortifications that were destroyed, and the bodies of those lying about, whom Jonathan had burned in the war, for they made heaps of them in his path. They also told the king what Jonathan had done, so as to blame him. But the king remained silent. Jonathan met with the king in Joppa with great ceremony, and they greeted each other and stayed the night there. Jonathan journeyed with the king to the river Eurytheus, and they went back to Jerusalem. Thus King Ptolemy ruled over the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea, and devised evil plans against Alexander. So he sent ambassadors to King Demetrius, saying, "Come, let us enter into a covenant with one another. I will give you my daughter, Alexander's wife, in marriage, and you will reign over your father's kingdom. For I regret giving him my daughter, since he tried to kill me." Thus Ptolemy blamed Alexander because he desired his kingdom. So he took back his daughter and gave her to Demetrius. Therefore he was estranged from Alexander, and their animosity was evident. Then Ptolemy entered Antioch and assumed the crown of Asia. So he wore two crowns on his head, that of Egypt and that of Asia. But King Alexander was in Sicily at the time, and the inhabitants there were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he engaged him in battle. So Ptolemy went out with a mighty force and faced him, putting him to flight. Then Alexander took refuge in Arabia, seeking safety. King Ptolemy was held in great honor, so Zebediah the Arab cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. But King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his garrisons in the fortresses were destroyed by the inhabitants of those fortresses. Thus, in the 167th year, Demetrius became king.
Okay, pause there for a second. Just to go over this a little bit, the whole area is in disarray. You've got three guys that are arguing over all the land, different kings, different kingdoms. And I love how they kind of go through the war here, which I don't know what to make of it, because we're talking about great distances from Egypt to Arabia to Jerusalem and north of it. You know, today it still takes a few hours to fly those directions, but moving on land and desert and things like that, we're talking about great distances that they're just discussing. Oh, he fled to Arabia. Well, that would have taken a month. You know, that's not just something you just do overnight. So,
Yeah, he had the audacity to keel over and die. So now the guy just chopped out of his head doesn't get anything out of it.
correct.
It's like what? Like if I just waited, honestly, Alexander probably would have rewarded me for keeping him safe, and I would have benefited.
Correct.
Now I got to deal with the third guy who don't know I exist. Probably just as well kill me.
Yeah. So,
But it passes a really good message that it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a king or you're whatever, you can see that you're nothing.
correct.
Like this Alexander was so important, like the previous chapter, and suddenly
Get
No
the
head.
war with Israel, it's helping us. He's like,
yeah,
"Hey, dude,"
exactly.
and it's like, you're one big benefactor. He's dead. Well, this is very inconvenient, and honestly.
As the Psalms say, we are a blade of grass. It is there one day, and the next day is burnt up. So even kings are that way. Yes, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. But yeah, our life is very short, and you're important only for where you are today. Tomorrow, you may not be that more that important. So exactly. So I'll continue. Verse 20.
In those days, Jonathan gathered men from Judea to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war for use against it. But some lawless men who despised their nation came to the king and told him Jonathan would set siege to the citadel. When the king heard this, he was enraged, and he broke camp and went to Ptolemais. He wrote Jonathan that he was to lift the siege and to meet him in Ptolemais at once for a conference. But when Jonathan heard this, he issued orders to continue the siege. Then he chose some elders of Israel and some priests and put himself in danger, for he took silver, gold, clothing, and many other friendly gifts and went to the king in Ptolemais. And Jonathan found favor with him. Again, some lawless men from the nation accused Jonathan, but the king did to him as those before him had done, and exalted him in front of all of his friends. He also confirmed him in the high priesthood and whatever other honors he held before, and considered him as one of his best friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to exempt Judea from taxes, along with the 3 provinces and Samaria, and promised him 300 talents. The king was pleased and wrote Jonathan a letter concerning all these things. In message was as follows.
Hold on 1 second there, just to kind of reiterate all this. Remember, Demetrius's father promised all these things to Jonathan and the Israelites, and that was rejected. Now Demetrius is offering the second thing, but the difference is the other guy is now dead. So so now we have the second Demetrius, who's got a little bit more power. But even though Jonathan was honored by the previous guy in the previous um, empire or kingdom, now Jonathan in Israel, ultimately Israel, because Jonathan is just a figurehead of Israel, is being honored now by several of the kingdoms here. And so they're gaining a foothold amongst all the other kingdoms that are there. So go ahead and continue with the letter now.
King Demetrius to his brother Jonathan and the nation of the Jews. Greetings. The copy of this letter which we wrote to Lacedaemonians, our relative concerning you, we have copied also to you, that you might know what it says. King Demetrius to his father Lacedaemonians, greetings to the nation of Jews, our friends, and who do what is right towards us. We have decided to do good because of their goodwill towards us. We have established the borders of Judea for them and the three provinces of Ephraim, Lydia, and Rathman. They were added to Judea from Samaria, as well as all the areas bordering them. All who offer sacrifices in Jerusalem, we have released from the royal taxes which the king received from them each year. From the harvest of the earth and the fruit of trees, any of the payments due us from now on, from the tithes, the salt pits, and the crown taxes, from all these we grant release. None of these provisions will be canceled from now on for all time. Now therefore take heed to make a copy of this and let it be given to Jonathan and put in a notable place on the holy mountain.
Okay, so essentially, again, Israel is becoming its own entity. It's being released of taxes to basically everybody at this point, and so yeah, go ahead and continue.
When King Demetrius saw the land was peaceful before him, and no one was opposed to him, he dismissed his troops, each to their own place, except the foreign soldiers whom he had recruited as mercenaries from the islands of the nations. So all the soldiers who had served his fathers hated him. Now, Trypho formerly had been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the soldiers complained against Demetrius. So he approached Imalku, the Arab, who was rearing Antiochus, the young son of Alexander. He insisted that he hand Antioch over to him, so as to make him king in place of his father. He told Imalku everything Demetrius had done and the hatred his troops had for him, and he remained there many days. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent to King Demetrius the request that he remove the soldiers in the citadel from Jerusalem, as well as those in the fortress, for they were at war with Israel. Then Demetrius sent to Jonathan, saying, not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will greatly honor you and the Jewish nation when I have the opportunity. And you will do rightly to send me soldiers who will ally with me because all my troops have revolted. So Jonathan sent 3,000 very able men to him at Antioch. When they came to the king, he was very glad at their arrival. The men from the city gathered within the city, 120,000 of them, and they went to kill the king. But the king fled into the palace, and those from the city seized the streets of the city, and they began to fight. So the king summoned the Jews for help, and they all rallied around him and dispersed throughout the city. On that day, they killed about 100,000 men. They set the city on fire, took many spoils on that day, and rescued the king. When the men of the city realized the Jews had gained control of the city at will, they lost their courage and called out to the king with his request: restore the peace and make the Jews quit fighting us in the city. So they threw down their weapons and made peace. Then the Jews were honored before the king and before all those in his kingdom. After this, they returned to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus, King Demetrius ruled on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was peaceful before them, before he broke his word about everything he promised Jonathan. Thus, he became estranged from him and did not repay Jonathan the favors he had done for him, but greatly afflicted him.
Okay, pause right there for a second. Um, so Jonathan or Demetrius is losing his army, he's losing his kingdom, makes peace with Jonathan. Jonathan sends Israelites to the city, protects the king, restores everything, and the people who were rebelling were like, wait a minute, these foreigners are now taking over our city. Maybe we need to go back to Demetrius. And they go back to Demetrius, and then Demetrius doesn't fulfill his responsibility to Jonathan. So themes here. That's just kind of how things work a little bit. But again, a lot of turmoil. But in the end, what's the message with all these battles back and forth and whatnot? Israel is establishing itself as its own kingdom, whereas previously they were completely under occupation. Now they kind of have their own seat at the table. And so that's kind of the important part of this book is how does Israel become what it is when when the Messiah comes, when the Christ comes, and this is how it's happening. It went from being again under occupation, completely um, decimated by Alexander the Great, under occupation for another 150 years or so, to within this 30-year battle, roughly 30 years, they're establishing themselves as a fully functional, established kingdom with allies of sorts surrounding them. At least people they've defeated in battle, and also people that they've have allies with. Whether or not they're fulfilling their agreements is in question, but at least they've had those. So
You need to be just strong enough where you're not really worth the effort, but you are still useful enough that if you don't placate or the other guy will take advantage and they'll gladly work for him.
yeah, and remember, I mean, again, take it for what it's worth. The 3,000 Jews go into the empire, into the kingdom, into the capital city, and kill 100,000 people. Whether or not that's real or not, the message is clear. The 3,000 men were
Butchering a lot of people.
butchering a lot of people, stronger, whatever it is. 100,000 people is a lot of people.
That's a lot. That's a lot of work, even if they're not fighting.
So you're decimating a population, right? I mean, what's South Haven? 50,000 people. So I mean, 100,000 people, especially in those days, that's a lot of manpower. You're decimating an empire. So whether or not the numbers are accurate, I mean, I'm sure there wasn't somebody checking off names, but the point of it is the message is getting clear here is that the Israelites are a strong power. They're not to be messed with, and that the surrounding areas are no longer as strong as they were at one point. It's the one thing that Alexander the Great did well is yes, he went in and he proved his point when he conquered somebody. But if anything, he would marry somebody. I think he had 3 wives when he died, to try and unite himself to the people. Um, but he didn't like decimate the place. He said, okay, you can live in peace, but you just have to be Greek now. But you can still live in peace. They're literally decimating people. So a little bit of a different situation. So, okay, verse 54. Let's finish up.
Later, Trypho returned and had with him the young boy Antioch, who put on the crown and became king. All the troops who had cursed Demetrius gathered around him. They fought against Demetrius, who was put to flight. Trypho,
Trifo.
Trypho, then captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. So Antioch, is it Antioch or Antioch?
Antiochus.
Antioch. Okay. So Antiochus the younger wrote to Jonathan, saying, I confirm you in the highest priesthood, set you over the 4 provinces, and you will be one of the king's friends. He also sent him gold cups to serve him at table, gave him authority to drink from these, to dress in purple, and to wear a golden buckle. He then established Simon his brother as general from the ladder of Tyre to the boundary of Egypt. Then Jonathan departed and journeyed beyond the river and into the cities. The entire army of Syria gathered around him as allies. When he went into Ascalon, the people of the city met him and honored him. From there, he left for Gaza, but when the inhabitants of Gaza shut him out, he besieged the city, set its surrounding fortifications on fire, and plundered them. Thus, the men of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan. He made peace with them, took the sons of their governors as hostages, and dispatched them to Jerusalem. Then he traveled through the country, going as far as Damascus. Jonathan also got word the officers of Demetrius had arrived in Kadesh in Galilee with their sizable army. They intended to oust him from office, so he set out to meet them, but he left his brother Simon in the country. Then Simon positioned himself at Bether and for many days fought against it and blocked it off. Then the people begged him for peace, and he granted it to them. So he cast them out from there, took possession of the city, and placed a garrison in it. Now Jonathan and his soldiers camped by the lake of Getheret,
Gennesaret.
and rose early the next morning and marched to the plains of Hazor. Then behold, the foreign army met him in the plain and set up an ambush against him in the mountains. But they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in the ambush rose up from their places and joined the battle. All Jonathan's men fled. None of them remained except Matthias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Chalpi,
Sophie.
uh, commanders of the armed forces. So Jonathan tore his garments, poured earth on his head, and prayed. Then he turned back to the battle, and put the enemy to flight. When Jonathan's men who had run away saw this, they returned and joined him in the pursuit of the enemy as far as Kadesh. And there they set up camp. As many as 3,000 of the foreign army fell that day. Then Jonathan went back to Jerusalem.
Thank you. Very good. So a few things here. So Trypho, the name there is actually kind of important in Christian history because Justin Martyr, one of his writings is dialogue with Trypho, a Jew. Okay, so like in the 2nd century that this is, and it's where we get a lot of the apologetics of Christianity. Justin's explaining to Trypho, the Jewish person, how Christ fulfills the prophecies and is the true Messiah, et cetera, et cetera. So that name's actually kind of important in Christian history as much as it is in the Jewish history here. But notice the area again that Jonathan is covering here. So he's going to Gaza and he destroys Gaza. So history repeats itself. Um, you know, it's all there. So Gaza, of course, is the area south of Israel before they get to Egypt. And then he goes all the way up, as it says, to Damascus, which is in Syria, modern day Syria. That's a large area. Again, just talking about bouncing from one place to the other, that's not an easy journey from one place to the other. And then the Lake of Gennesaret is just one more one of the titles of the Sea of Galilee, that Christ spent so much time on, and which is out by in between Israel, modern day Israel, and Jordan. So covering a large area, but again, this is the area that Christ is going to minister in, and it's an area that is commensurate to modern day Israel. And so they're covering that area. But at the end there, Jonathan's forces are being overrun. And so what does Jonathan do? Tears his garments, goes and pours earth on his head or ash on his head. What is that? A symbol of repentance. We've done something wrong. Clearly, God's not on our side. We've done something wrong. So he goes and he repents. Once he does that, the tide turns and God goes with him, and they succeed in battle. Um, so again, a lot of information there. Um, again, it's historical, but there's also some symbolism there. But again, it also lays the groundwork for when the Messiah comes and the area that he's going to serve. So, any questions on chapter 11? I think we can do chapter 12, and we'll have to pause at the end of chapter 12. But 12 is a shorter chapter than we've been going through. So, somebody want to read 12?
When Jonathan saw the time was right, he chose envoys and sent them to Rome to validate and renew friendship with them. Also, he sent letters to Sparta and other localities for the same reasons. So they left for Rome, entered the Senate chamber, and said, Jonathan, the high priest, and the nation of the Jews sent us here to renew the former friendship and alliance between ourselves. Then the Romans wrote letters to the citizens in every place so they might send forth ambassadors to the land of Judah in peace. This is the copy of the letters which Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. Jonathan, the high priest, the elders of the nation, the priests, and the Jewish people, to the brothers, the Spartans, greetings. Sometime earlier, letters were sent to Onias, the high priest, by Arius, who ruled over you, that you are our brothers, as the attached copy indicates. Onias received the envoy with honor, and he accepted the letters, which plainly showed the alliance and friendship. Therefore, although we do not need these things, since we have the holy books in our hands, we have decided to send and renew our brotherhood and friendship, so we would not be estranged from you. For a significant time has elapsed since you sent word to us. Therefore, at every opportunity, both on feast days and ordinary days, we remember you unceasingly in the sacrifices we offer and in our prayers, as it is right and proper to remember brothers. For we rejoice in your glory. But many troubles and many wars have surrounded us, and the kings around us have fought against us. We did not wish to trouble you and our other allies and friends with these wars. But we have had help from heaven assisting us, for we were freed from our enemies and they were humble. Therefore we chose Numenius, the son of Antiochus, and Antipater, son of Jason, and sent them to Rome to renew our former friendship and alliance with them. We also ordered them to go to you, to greet you, and to give you these letters from us concerning the renewal of our brotherhood. Now then, please send us a reply. This is the copy of the letters they sent to Onias. King Arius of the Spartans, to Onias the high priest, greetings. It has been put in writing regarding both the Spartans and the Jews that they are brothers and are both of the family of Abraham. So now that we know this pleasure, write us concerning your welfare. Thus we are writing to you that your cattle and possessions are ours, and ours are yours. Therefore we order our ambassadors to report to you accordingly.
Okay, so let's pause there. Again, the Jewish people are reiterating their alliance with Rome, with Sparta, some of the Greek states. They're not necessarily asking per se for help, but they're kind of making them aware of what is going on, so that should there be a need, you're put on notice, if you will. So.
Then Jonathan heard the officers of Demetrius had come back with a larger army than before to make war against him. So he marched out of Jerusalem and engaged them in the area around Hamath, giving them no chance to invade his country. So he sent out spies to their encampment. They later returned and told him that the army of Demetrius planned to attack the Jews at night. At sunset, Jonathan ordered those with him to stay awake and to be ready with their weapons for a fight during the night. Then he sent out an advance guard to surround the camp. When the enemy got word that Jonathan and the soldiers were ready for battle, they were terrified at heart. So they lit fires in their camp and fled. But Jonathan and his men did not know this until it was morning, for they saw the firelight. So Jonathan chased after them, but he could not overtake them, because they had crossed over the Eleftherios River. Then Jonathan turned aside against the Arabs called Zabudians, and struck them and took their spoils. He then broke camp and marched to Damascus and throughout all that country. Meanwhile, Simon went out and marched as far as Ascalon and the fortress nearby, and turned aside to Joppa and captured it, for he heard they wished to hand over the fortress to the men sent by Demetrius. So he established a garrison there to guard it. When Jonathan returned, he assembled the elders of the people. Together they decided to build fortress in Judea and to make the walls of Jerusalem even higher and raise a great high wall between the citadel and the city to separate it from the city, so it would be isolated and its garrison could not buy or nor sell goods. So they assembled to rebuild the city and part of the wall on the valley to the east that had fallen. Thus he repaired the wall that is called Kephanatha. Simon also built Adida and the sheep in the Shepelah. They fortified it and set up both bolted gates. Then Trypho sought to rule Asia, to wear the crown, and to stretch forth his hand against the king Antiochus. He also took precautions lest Jonathan would not permit it, but waged war against him. So, seeking to capture and destroy him, he marched forth to Bethshan. Then Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 soldiers chosen for battle, and he came to Bethshan. When Trypho saw that he came with a large army, he was afraid to stretch forth his hand against him. So he received him honorably and met him with all his friends. He gave gifts to Jonathan and ordered his friends and his own troops to obey him as himself. Then he said to Jonathan, "Why have you troubled all these men? We are not at war. Now send them home, but choose a few soldiers for yourself to be with you. Then come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it over to you all along with the rest of the fortress and the remaining troops and officers. Then I will turn around and go home, for that is why I came here." So Jonathan believed Trypho and did as he had said, and sent away the troops and departed for the region of Judah. But he kept 3,000 soldiers with him, 2,000 of which he left in Galilee, and 1,000 who went with him. But when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the men of the city shut the gates and captured him, and they slew him with a sword, all who entered with him. Then Trypho sent soldiers and cavalry into Galilee and the great plain to kill all Jonathan's men. But when the soldiers learned Jonathan and those with him had been captured and killed, they encouraged each other to keep marching in close formation, ready for attack. But when the pursuers saw them ready to fight for their lives, they retreated. So they all came safely to the land of Judah and cried out for Jonathan and his men. They were exceedingly afraid, and all Israel mourned greatly. Then all the nations surrounding them tried to defeat them, saying, "There is none to lead them or to help them. Now then, let us wage war against them and erase them from memory."
How does that? Jonathan doesn't seem to have any issue with his brother Simon. Simon just seems like to be unusually loyal and reliable, where everybody else is. As soon as you walk out, your brother freaking tries to rob everything.
Well, that's just the nature of human nature, right? But yeah, I mean, Trifo, of course, sees that he can't win the battle hand-to-hand combat, so he uses guile and deceit to defeat Jonathan. We'll see whether or not Jonathan is killed there or not. They continue to use him, but also as soon as Jonathan, as with any army, you know, you go for the general, right? Because as soon as the general or whoever's in charge is killed,
There's no reason for
everybody else leaves. They retreat.
everybody.
Exactly. So
Hydra.
exactly.
It's like you killed the one dude. What? Now you unleash all his brothers, and they're the actual problem. He kept them in line.
Yeah. So that's the issue. Is now that Jonathan is dead, everybody sees, oh, the king's dead there in Israel. They're open for business now.
Mhm.
Whereas before they wouldn't have attacked now they can because Jonathan is killed. And we're going to stop there, but we're going to see in the next chapter that Simon does take over as the head of Israel at that point. But this is, this is why if you can kill the king, the empire becomes available, if you will. So, okay, we'll pause there. We'll do 13 through 16 next Wednesday. Thank you all. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.